Hello again. It has, of course, long been known that if you repeatedly tell the same lie over and over again, then eventually people are likely to regard it as the truth. The rulers of Germany during the Third Reich were familiar with this principle, and it has been put into practice by various totalitarian regimes since the end of the Second World War. Soviet Russia, Red China, North Korea, and various Muslim countries have all found that truth can be suppressed as long as you have the means to ensure that lies are published widely and often enough. It is uncomfortable to reflect that precisely this tactic is now being used in Western democracies such as Britain and the United States. Some of these lies have now become so firmly entrenched that anybody daring to challenge them is likely to be viewed as a dangerous agitator or heretic. Take, for instance, the notion that the Roman Empire was a melting pot of various ethnicities, and that black people in ancient Rome were often to be seen and enjoyed positions of high status. Anybody attempting to show people how wrong-headed and foolish this idea is likely to be denounced as a mad racist. Of course it's true. Haven't we been told so time and again by all kinds of people, such as popular television historians, among others? It is beyond all belief that the whole thing is just a piece of nonsense dreamt up for social and political reasons only a few years ago. Nevertheless, that is the case. There is no evidence whatsoever that any black people lived in Rome or were to be found elsewhere in the empire. There may, of course, have been a few such people, but there is no actual evidence. It is all wild conjecture and guesswork. The sequel to the historical epic Gladiator, which was released a few months ago, shows many black people in Rome, and indeed one of the most important men in ancient Rome is shown to be a black African. Denzel Washington's performance in this role was widely praised. Even so, it remains the case that there is no evidence for a single black person having been in Rome at that time. Casting a black man in the role of Macrinus, which is who Washington played in the film, was very unpopular in Algeria, which regarded this as a form of American imperialism. This is because Macrinus was based upon a real person who actually did wield a good deal of power in Rome and eventually became emperor. He was not black, though, but Berber, and there are statues of him which show this clearly. This leads us to one of the tricks which are used to present Rome as being full of black people. The empire covered North Africa, which was colonized by both Phoenicians and Romans, as well as the Berbers who had been living there before the founding of cities like Carthage. None of these people were black, but they were technically African, and by describing them as such, it is possible to give modern people the idea that they were in fact black. African and black are virtually synonymous these days. If I say that there's an African community in, I don't know, Glasgow, say, most people would assume I'm talking about black people. But of course, it could technically be a bunch of Egyptians living there. We use the term African and black more or less interchangeably a lot of the time. Because of this, describing an emperor of Rome as being African suggests subliminally to many people that he must have been black. Despite all the most rigorous scientific tests, though, involving DNA and the analysis of various isotopes found in skeletons, not a single trace of a sub-Saharan African has ever been found in Rome dating from 2,000 years ago. There has been a great deal of work done, but the evidence remains absent. How do we know the ethnic composition of ancient Rome? The answer is that between a third and 4/10 of the city's population were slaves, and they tended to be buried without elaborate tombs, grave goods, or even markers. Excavating an ordinary cemetery will almost certainly mean encountering a lot of ordinary working people as well as many slaves. In recent years, a large number of um, big surveys of burial grounds from the days of Imperial Rome have been undertaken, and the bones analysed for various trace elements and so on, which would enable us to be fairly sure which part of the world the person came from. Water from different sources causes isotopes of oxygen to build up to varying levels in tooth enamel, meaning that it's possible to be fairly sure where an individual spent his or her childhood. So if we analyse a lot of skeletons in ancient Rome, that should give us a fairly good idea about the ethnic composition of the city. We'll be able to see whether or not it really was some sort of melting pot of different ethnicities, people from Africa and Asia and so on. One such examination of the necropolis of Isola Sacra near Rome found that many of those buried there had been born and spent their childhoods in other parts of Europe. That suggested in turn that they may well have been slaves captured and brought to Rome. Of the 61 bodies examined, only one had elements in the bones consistent with an origin outside Europe, namely North Africa. Much the same picture has emerged when skeletons of the more well-to-do have been studied. It will be recalled that some years ago it was claimed the skeleton of a black African woman had been found in the English county of Sussex, the so-called Beachy Head woman. For a while she became the poster girl of those who wished to believe in a black African presence in the Roman Empire, and artist impressions were composed of her showing a black woman. When finally DNA tests were made, she proved to be thoroughly European, probably from the island of Cyprus. The very same thing has happened with all the remains in Rome and other parts of the Roman Empire, which have at various times been claimed as sub-Saharan Africans, usually based upon the shape of the skulls, science rather akin to phrenology. As soon as serious scientific testing is undertaken, claims vanish like the morning dew. No matter how loud or frequent the claims, the simple truth is that there is still no evidence at all for black people in the Roman Empire. There may possibly have been the odd slave or two brought up the Nile and sold to European traders, but that's likely to have been all, and even that is very much uncertain.